Alright, so obviously I'll be talking about, obviously I'll be talking about cellular respiration, cellular respiration, and so there are three main steps in cellular respiration, which the first is glycolysis. And so glycolysis begins with glucose, and I'll put a G there just for shorthand. And so glucose, right, it is phosphorylated. And so what that means is that a phosphate group is added, and this phosphate comes from ATP. And so once the phosphate group is removed, you're left with ADP, or adenine diphosphate. And it not happens once, but twice. And so then you're left with this intermediate sugar, which you could just call glucose biphosphate, since there are two phosphate groups. And so it's not very stable, and so as a result it breaks off into two sugars called pGal, or transphosphate, TP, depending on what your textbook calls it, but I will call it pGal. And so pGal undergoes a few steps before glycolysis is finished. Well, sorry about that. In any case, with pGal, it first of all, it's oxidized via NAD+, and you are then resulting with NADH. And whenever something is oxidized, something else is reduced because the electron has to go somewhere. And so pGal loses an electron via a hydrogen atom, and so NAD+ gains this and then forms NADH. And so it also gains an inorganic phosphate, and the two phosphate the two phosphate groups are then taken back to regenerate ATP. And then you're left with a sugar called pyruvate. And this step is the same as for this entire step takes place with the other pGal as well. And so this begins the next intermediate step, which is actually the name of the step, really, the intermediate stage or link reaction. But it's not really like in the main step or stage. So the pyruvate, which is OCCH3 of a P here for short, pyruvate. It, well, via transport proteins right here, this being the inner mitochondria, sorry, not inner, this being the mitochondrial membrane. Oh, whoops, that was actually there. It is oxidized once again with our friend NAD, plus to form NADH, and it's decarboxylated, which means that it loses a carbon through the form of CO2, and coenzyme A, but I'll let CoA for short, is added, and then you're left with acetyl-CoA, which is SCOA, carbon double bond O, CH3, which is acetyl CoA. It's kind of messy, but you get the idea. But it's important to note that this is the mitochondrion, this is the mitochondrial membrane, and these are transport proteins that allow pyruvate to pass through. And so, once that's done, the intermediate stage, the Krebs cycle, can begin, which is the second main stage of cellular respiration. It has several different names, one of which could be the citric acid cycle, but I'll just call it the Krebs cycle. And so I'll put ACOA for short. It really bonds with a 4C sugar called oxaloacetate. Oops, that's an X. It's kind of there. I'll stop, but it's acetate after that. And so the coenzyme leaves, and since that was a 2C sugar, 4 plus 2 is 6, and so you're then left with a 6C sugar, and so this 6C sugar is decarboxylated, which once again is the loss of a carbon through the form of CO2. It's also oxidized. Once again, whenever something is oxidized, something else is reduced, and so NAD is reduced, and it gains an electron through the form of a hydrogen atom, so NADH. And so then you're left with a 5C sugar, since 6 minus 1 is 5. And so this sugar takes a similar route. It also loses CO2, a carbon through the form of CO2, and is oxidized. There. And so then from there you have a 4C sugar, but it's not quite regenerated yet. It needs to be oxidized oxidized not once but twice. Once with NAD to form NADH, no surprise there. Oops. But here it's also oxidized by FAD to form FADH2. And also ATP is produced by the synthesis of ADP and PI. I was kind of getting squished, but right here, ATP. And so yes, this is the Krebs cycle. Although it's important to note that since there's 2 pyruvate produced, that means that 2 acetyl-CoAs will be produced. So this process will occur not once but twice if 1 glucose is used. So lastly, that leaves us with the third main stage in cellular respiration, which is the electron transport chain. And what's significant about this is that it produces the most ATP out of any stage whatsoever. And so there's like an electron transport chain really. There's carriers and proteins with actually I'll make this kind of there and then excuse my horrid drawing, but that's essentially what your basic drawing is supposed to look like. But if you recall, we produced NADH, right? And so this hydrogen atom is significant once more because the electron is stripped, leaving a hydrogen left. Sorry, a proton left rather. So H plus. And so eventually, oh sorry, and then NAD is once again formed. Same goes for FADH2. To form FAD once again, and H plus. And so as the electrons follow this chain, these protein complexes will release enough energy for these protons to flow through ATP synthase, which is an enzyme that allows for the production of ATP. So to combine ADP and PI, inorganic phosphate, to form ATP. And this is called oxidative phosphorylation because oxygen is involved, and it's involved because as the electrons flow, it's finally accepted by oxygen, the final electron acceptor, and it then binds with two hydrogens to form H2O. Oxygen is a diatomic element, so it can only exist in forms of O2, naturally at least. So the formula goes like this: 2H plus 1/2 O2. So then that would form H2O. And so yeah, oh yes, and so we produced 6 NADH, if you recall. Actually, we produced 6 NADH because if you recall, the Krebs cycle took place twice. So that means 6 NADH and then 2 FADH. But if you do recall, we did also produce technically 2 ATP because the cycle went through twice. And so NADH forms 1 NADH forms 3 ATP, so that's 18. FADH2 forms 1 FADH2 forms 2 ATP, so now you have 4. So you have 22 plus this 2, you're then left with 24. However, if you then do recall, we did produce 2 NADH as well in the glycolysis stage. So 2 NADH times 3 is 6. So 6. So then you have 30, right? And so that forms 30 ATP. But back in the glycolysis stage, the link reaction, we formed technically 2 NADH once more. So once again, you just add 6 again to form 36 ATP. And yes, it is. That's how much ATP is produced via one glucose molecule. Although it's important to note something that I forgot is that within the electron transport chain, the process of hydrogen, uh, sorry, hydrogen protons going through the ATP synthase, like the diffusion of it through the energy released via the protein complexes, that's called chemiosmosis. Very important concept that you should know. Alright, and that is cellular respiration in a nutshell.